Heavenly Father, today we put on the full armor to protect us against attack. We put on the belt of truth to protect against lies and deception. We put on the breastplate of righteousness to protect our hearts from the temptations. We put the gospel of peace on our feet to walk in your light, peace, and freedom with the Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word, that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm absolutely honored to introduce you all to MK Ultra, satanic ritual abuse and organized abuse survivor, overcomer and thriver, loving mother, physician, published writer and author, content creator and podcaster, radiologist turned activist, founder of the Angel Coalition and co-founder of Women and Children First and the Babushka Brigade, Start for enthusiast, award winner of the University of Washington School of Medicine's prestigious Humanitarian Award, and all-around inspiration, Dr. Juliette Engel. Born into a family entangled with OSS, CIA, NSA operatives, Juliette's childhood was stolen by the CIA's sinister MKUltra program. At the tender age of 6, she was sold by her father into a world of mind control, sexual abuse, and satanic ritual abuse she would later come to know and term as sex magic. Subjected to relentless physical and psychological torture, her early years were a crucible of pain designed to fracture her mind and mold her into a tool for the agency's dark agendas. Yet, within this darkness, a spark of resilience flickered, a spark that would one day ignite a blazing path of redemption. At 17, Juliette's courage and instinct for survival propelled her to escape, barefoot and with nothing but her will to live. With no memory of her harrowing childhood due to trauma-forced amnesia, she forged a new life, driven by an inner strength she scarcely understood. She put herself through college and medical school, becoming a respected physician and radiologist. In Seattle, she built a successful practice, her professionalism and compassion earning her acclaim. But beneath this veneer of achievement, her past lay dormant, waiting to resurface. In 1992, Juliette's life took a pivotal turn when she sold her practice to establish the Miramed Institute in Moscow, a nonprofit dedicated to improving obstetric care and advancing human rights for women and children in post-Soviet Russia. It was here, amidst her mission to enhance medical care for orphanage children, that she stumbled upon a chilling truth. State institutions were linked to an international network trafficking young Russian girls into prostitution. This discovery shattered her amnesia, triggering fragmented memories of her own abuse and awakening her to the global scourge of human trafficking, a modern slave she could not ignore. A modern slave trade she could not ignore. What followed was the beginning of her fearless activism. The resurfacing of her childhood memories was agonizing, yet Juliette transformed this pain into purpose. Her memoir, Sparky, Surviving Sex Magic, and its sequel, Angels Over Moscow, chronicle her survival and her fight against trafficking, earning her recognition as a best-selling author. Then her third book, Moscow Traffic, further amplifies her voice as a whistleblower and advocate. Juliette's spiritual journey is just as profound as her activism. Raised with a connection to God through her grandmother's teachings of the Lord's Prayer, she credits her faith with sustaining her through the darkest moments. She believes Christianity's historical power to end satanic rites remains a vital force against modern evils. This conviction fuels her initiative, Protect Our Children, launched to equip communities with tools to combat child sex trafficking in the United States, which she identifies as a major client of the global child trade. Her work emphasizes local engagement, urging citizens to join school boards, attend town halls, and scrutinize electoral transparency to root out corruption and protect our vulnerable children. Despite the threats she has faced, Juliette remains undaunted. Her investigations revealed pedophilia's infiltration into government, academia, entertainment, and even law enforcement, often shielded by complicit intelligence agencies and media. Yet she sees hope in awareness and collective action, advocating for a global reckoning to dismantle these low frequency shadow influences. Today, Juliette stands as a living miracle, a woman who transformed her trauma into a sacred mission. Her radiant compassion, forged from her suffering, inspires survivors and activists alike. Through her writing, speaking, and relentless advocacy, she shines as a beacon of light and hope, proving that even in the darkest moments, the chains can be broken by the unyielding power of truth, faith, and love. Her story is not just a biography, it is a call to action to confront evil, to protect the innocent, and to reclaim humanity's soul. Before wrapping up the introduction of today's guests, I'd like to share just a couple quick reminders and updates. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, if you wanted to share any information privately with me, or if you were interested in submitting a written testimony for my upcoming book series or to be featured on a Substack article, you can reach out to me via email at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com or standbysurvivors@protonmail.com. Additionally, I've teamed up with a couple of my favorite brands to offer you guys exclusive discount codes on products I love, such as Rife Technology frequency machines and CZTL's premium methylene blue. You can find all the relevant links and codes along with other resources in the show notes. Your support across all platforms is greatly appreciated, especially as I've had to shift to mainly using alternative streaming platforms such as Rumble and X following the termination of my former YouTube channel. I've just recently started a new YouTube channel, and you can subscribe to me there at the handle at Imagination Podcast Official that I will be and that I am rebuilding currently as well. This transition to multiple platforms is crucial to continue sharing vital information with the public and disclosure communities. So thank you all on the other side of the screen wholeheartedly for helping to make the imagination the safest space on the internet for survivor, whistleblower, advocate, and educator disclosures. Your support means the absolute world to me and to every guest on the show. So, you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming today's guest of honor, survivor and whistleblower, warrioress, voice for the voiceless, humanitarian, public speaker, anti-child trafficking and survivor advocate, woman of God, and walking miracle, the one, the only, Dr. Juliette Engel. Juliette, thank you so much for being here with us today. It's such an honor to finally have you on.
Well, Emma, thank you so much. And it's an honor for me to be here. And I've watched your podcasts for, over a year now. And I'm just tremendously impressed with what you do. I think your gathering of people's stories is critically important. And you need to have those saved in a library so that they are not lost and those voices remain heard. And with the information now coming out about the CIA taking responsibility for what they did with MK Ultra, drug experiments, torture, satanic ritual abuse of children, all of these things are now part of the National Security Archive, and they've admitted to all of this. That makes it even more important because getting the word out there, we can't change things while we're all under this oppressive mind control, and we're all under it.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And the work that people like you and Kathy O'Brien and others that have been speaking out for a while has been so vitally important in helping crack that and to put pressure on the right people, on the right agencies to start having this information come out. Because at some point, like you said, there's so many testimonies just on my channel alone.
Yeah.
That's not considering the rest of the internet where so many other, hundreds, thousands, millions of testimonies lie. But at some point, they have to admit that they did this. One person you can call crazy. Millions of people, I don't think you can. So every single survivor and testimony, it really is a piece to the puzzle. And there's so much value in that corroboration and seeing the overlaps, helping get validation, and just really helping to educate people that didn't go through this, that this is real. It happened and it never stopped, and not only that, but like you said, we're all under some sort of mind
Yes.
control, you
It's
know?
affecting everyone.
Yes. 100%. And so I really appreciate the work that you're doing and have done. And I'm excited to dive into that today and on future episodes that I do. Because like I said, I'd love to have you on more than once. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time today sharing about you because you have had just an incredibly harrowing journey, yet so inspiring to see where you are today. somebody could meet you today and have no idea that you ever had an ounce of trauma in your life, that you never went through anything. You're a bright beacon of light and of hope, and you're so accomplished and have done so much. And I really want to shine a light today on you and honor you and where you came from. And then, like I said, get into the work that you've done as a result of that and because of that almost. So let's go back in time a little bit, Juliette. Your history is incredible in your family and really shows how this gets passed down generationally and sort of some of the roots of where this is. So I wanted you to maybe paint a little bit of that background and share sort of, where your family came from that eventually led to you being put into this generation after generation.
Yeah, you really have to look at the long timeline on all of this. And I'm 76 years old, and it's really taken me a lifetime to get to the point where I put it together this much. And it's really with people like you that are delving in the younger generation. I want to impart all the knowledge and information that I've gathered and, call it wisdom of the ages of my age and give it to you because the solution will come with the coming generations. But you have to be informed. So for me, I go all the way back. I was sold into MK Ultra by my father when I was 6 years old in 1955. And at that time, of course, I knew nothing about what was going on, but I was sold. I was raped in front of my father. I had to watch him taking money for me. When I was screaming for him to help me, he turned to me and said, "This is what I raised you for." And that changed everything in my life. I went from being 5 years old to being the adult in the room. And that I expect I was either going to do that and survive, or I would have been lost at that moment. And after that, on the car ride home, I fell out of the car or I jumped out of the car. I don't know, but I wound up having pretty severe injuries from jumping or falling out of the car or being pushed out of the car. I don't know which one it was. And that began my journey into the MK Ultra world, where I spent half of my life growing up in what they called annexes, but what the CIA now admits were their safe houses, where they were given floors of hospitals, wings of universities, buildings on religious campuses. Their safe house system eventually reached all across America, and they used that for their abuse of adult victims and thousands of child victims. Uh, it that really marked my life. It was moving from place to place to place because the social services I grew up mostly in California, and the social services were not part of the MK Ultra system at that time. They are now. So there's no safety. But at that time, they would begin to pick up the fact that something was wrong in our family and something was happening to me. And I was only coming to school half the time. And all that time, I was coming in abused and bruised and with horrible dark rings under my eyes. And then my parents would pick up and move. And when we switched counties or switched regions, then it was a different jurisdiction, different school district. There weren't computer records. So they were able to move around and hide the abuse by doing that. Now I think the entire system is complicit, and just breaks my heart what children are going through now. So the scale of I'm kind of jumping around. I'm assuming that people have a knowledge of what the MK Ultra program is. I'll give a little bit of background, which is that during World War II, in the concentration camps and other sites leading up to World War II, the Nazis carried out extensive mind control experimentations that were quite successful at molding people, forcing people to do things against their will, and using when they had access to the concentration camps, then they did all kinds of experimentation with torture, drugs abuse, satanic ritual abuse. And the Nazis were, even in the 1930s, they were so obsessed by the idea of the power of Satan that they searched out satanic ritual sites, including the church in Pergamon. Pergamon was one of the seven churches of Asia in Revelation. And St. John wrote that Pergamon was the seat of Satan. So the Germans in the 1930s went to Pergamon. It was a ruin, but there was still quite a bit of the Temple of Jupiter still left there. They took it all. So they transported the entire thing to Berlin. It's now in Berlin on an island of museums where it's being reconstructed and researched. But that was just one of many, many objects they collected from around the world that they assumed had some kind of satanic power. And interestingly, Mein Kampf, MK, stands for Mein Kampf. And so Hitler was writing about this in his book in the 1930s, and it's never been translated into English. It was translated in 1935 or so by Alan Cranston, who later became a senator. But the translation was so distorted, and Hitler said it was a complete fabrication. It was so bad. He took it from 300,000 words to 70,000 words. And the translation was so bad that Hitler sued Cranston in an American court for fraud and misinterpretation, and won. So that's how bad it was. But we still have the original, we still have Cranston's translation. So we have no idea what Hitler actually said. But in the MK Ultra program, as I was raised in that program, a lot of the material, or they said, I was a child, so I'm repeating what I heard when I was 7, 8, 9, 10, up to the age of 17. They took this out of the mythology of Nazism, and so there's a lot of meat there. There's a lot of and where my family comes into this is that my grandfather, his father, and all of his uncles were all German speakers, 33-degree Masons and Shriners and Templars. And they were in Nuremberg as prosecutors and lawyers for the OSS. And they were actively recruiting the Germans that were considered, too valuable to hang. And they were brought to the United States. They were actually divided up between Russia, Great Britain, and the US. So my uncle, who later founded the NSA, or was one of the founders of the NSA, and his father and uncles brought these German scientists to the United States. They were distributed around the country, given new identities. And then the family, each branch of the family gave them a child. So I was the child that our branch apparently sold into this process. I know of others. I didn't know about this until I was in my 60s, but I know of others that were sold into this program. None of them survived. And it's for the life of me, I can't figure out why. I've spent my whole life searching out how and who, but the big why is it's almost like when we understand the why and more about the who, we'll understand exactly how to defeat it, because this is affecting everything in this country right now. And as Kathy O'Brien says, which is why I love doing the interviews with Kathy, because she's quite right when she says we don't need to know that. What we need to know is that we are pure souls. We have our own connection to the divine. Our strength has nothing to do with the and our weaknesses. It has nothing to do with the imposition of this madness on us in our lives. But I think she's a little more advanced than I am. I haven't quite given it all up yet. But is that kind of a jumble for you, or?
No, that was a really great explanation, and it shows these different relationships. I think that's one of the unbelievable things is people in regular society that didn't grow up with a family that had all these connections, when they hear of a survivor coming forward and they don't take time to listen to the testimony, it can sound really unbelievable that some child is just I think people have this perception that like the government like abducts them and it's like this super conspiratorial thing. But when you really break it down and you think about, multi-generational abuse, you think about connections to evil that families, back then and even now continue to have, to Nazis and satanic cults and, people who worship Satan, and you look at these different connections and you look at some of the positions that these families were in where they could, if you're already evil, you're already a psychopath, you have a kid and somebody offers you money for it,
Yeah.
that's like a no-brainer for a psychopath. Like regular people can't relate to that, but the history really is important to understand this, the World War II aspect and, it dating back prior to that even, but just having it be refined during that period and then seeing the dispersal of these Nazi scientists into countries like America that ended up in places like Stanford that you were taken and, these other different universities and institutions. And it starts to make sense. It doesn't seem as conspiratorial anymore. And I think your story does a wonderful job helping illustrate that in a really concise way where people can start to connect that and say, that doesn't sound so crazy. I can see how she ended up in that, even though you never deserved it, of course. But, understanding psychopathy and sort of the root of this, which is, the Nazism, the Satanism, it doesn't sound so crazy anymore. And so for you, you were 6 whenever this happened to you. And I'm so sorry that your parents, your ultimate protectors, what a betrayal. I can't even imagine how hard that must have been for you to try to contend with all of that at such a young age. Where for you, I know you missed a lot of school, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that. But where did your abuse mainly take place?
I well, we had I was abused by both my parents and my grandfather, and so it happened. A lot of abuse happened at home, but the satanic abuse took place at what they call annexes. And the first annex I went to um, was a psychology building on the University of Washington campus, which is still there. And it later officially became the Department of Psychology, probably, and has a brick building. But at the time in 1955, when I was first taken there, it was one of those post-war uh, Quonset hut kind of annexes, which you've probably never seen, but we used to see a lot of. And and uh, and I've learned from the recent release of the National Security Archive on the MK Ultra program, in which the CIA admits to doing all of this, and it gives a 44-page report on how they did it and how they obtained access to annexes, and they called them safe houses in public institutions. Like 85 universities around the United States had MK Ultra programs in the middle of them, but not directly associated with them. That was in 1976 when this was reported in Congress and then supposedly shut down. Yeah, it never shut down. And so I would spend half of my time at school because you had to attend 90 days out of the school year. You had to be physically at the school or they wouldn't advance you and there would be investigations and fines. I don't know. They thought it would draw too much attention to our family. So I had to be in school for 90 days. But the rest of the time, I was in annexes. I was at universities. I was for weeks at a time. When we lived in California, I'd be taken down to Mexico and we're basically they would have us have groups of kids on beaches living on Rosarita Beach at the Autonomous University of Mexico down there doing rituals. So conducting, we weren't doing, we were forced to be there. So that's where a lot of the satanic abuse took place, satanic rituals. And of course, it all involved drugs. And uh, in the report from the National Security Archive, they admit that Eli Lilly donated the drugs to the CIA and provided tonnage of LSD in the 1950s and 60s. I can't even imagine what a ton of LSD looks like, but they were donating it by the ton to get Americans addicted to it. And what's the big antidepressant that all Americans are on now? Because that came right out of it. Oh, shoot.
Prozac, right?
Prozac, yes,
Okay.
that was the origins of Prozac. Eli Lilly getting people hooked on uh, LSD and other related antipsychotic and anti-anxiety medications. So finding the ones that are most addictive. So they were complicit in it. They came from the Dulles' relationship to Eli Lilly in Switzerland during the war. So you can trace all these things back, and it actually starts making sense, but you have to take the long view. And in my family, going back generation after generation after generation, this is something that was always in the family. And my mother was involved, her brother, who then started was at Arlington Hall, and then the group that started the NSA. And then he was in charge of setting up GCHQ in England for the Five Eyes. So he was the CIA NSA link to MI6, and apparently he'd been to Bletchley Park during the time the Enigma machine was being decoded, and that's where he made connection with Russians who were there, who later invited me to Moscow to find out what was going on. So,
Wow.
so all these things are connected. There's always a connection, and where they aren't connected, and that's why I wasn't killed. I used to wonder because in these satanic ritual abuse sessions, like what happened in Mexico, people were killed and children were sacrificed, and and there would be a child killed on one side of me and on the other side of me, but they didn't kill me. And and I grew up with such guilt about that I couldn't save these children. And why was I living when they died? And I'd say in terms of blocking my progress, and I bet you run into this with other MK Ultra survivors and ritual abuse, all kinds of survivors. Like, why were you spared and the others lost? And I finally understand it's because I was. It's one thing to say I was a bloodline, but I was multi-generational bloodline. For my parents, I was a business. They got paid for having me in this program. And it was it was something they had to do, sort of like belonging to the country club or something. They had to have a kid in MK Ultra if you were going to be in this intelligence community club. So it goes way, way back. If I've done my ancestry digging, and it goes back and back. And my great grandfather was the commandant of the Knights Templar for North America. So it and Templars, Crusaders, it just goes back. So but it's destructive. It's stupid. I think and in my family, in this group of people who are doing this, they interbreed. It's you don't marry outside of this community, and I think like royal lines that breed themselves into idiocy. I think we're there. I think we've given control or the people that we trusted to control so many things have just bred themselves into utter stupidity. And we have to fix this because the idea that of destroying our children, destroying our reproduction, destroying our health, destroying our mental capacity, disconnecting ourselves from God. I mean, we're doing everything wrong, and we're not going to survive this unless we pull out of it. And that's why I was talking about looking at star forts and just trying to grab a different reality than what we're told, because what we're told is universally wrong, and we have to fight our way through that. And I know how hard it is because it took it took me ever since I was a little girl, and my grandmother taught me the Lord's Prayer. I had the Lord's Prayer, and I wanted to be a Christian, and of course, everything was against that. It was a constant fight against that, and I won't go through what they did to make sure that I didn't go into Christianity, but I am still so marred by what happened that I can't read the Bible. I cannot read it. I can listen to it. I can hear it. I can pretty much recite a lot of it now because I've heard it so many times, but I couldn't read it. It was blocked. So if that's still in me, I mean, think what's in other people. So anyway, I've given you a lot of stuff there.
Yeah, and like you said, seeing these different connections. And you mentioned the NSA, the CIA also comes up
Mhm.
in regards to MK Ultra. What is sort of the difference in those and the relationship to these programs?
Well, what I would recommend, and I sent you the link. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it, but the National Security Archive. Everyone listening should take a look at this because on December 23rd, 2024, the National Security Archive at George Washington University released a uh, a report on it's an accumulation of reports, IG reports on MK Ultra and how it was done, who did it, what they did. So it's a complete admission of everything your people are saying, what I've been saying, what Kathy's been saying about the drugs, about the people involved, about the locations, about how it was done, about the fact that the government is sponsoring this, the fact that it was headed up in the report, it states it was headed up by Sidney Gottlieb, who was the head of technical services for the CIA and then the NSA. So there was information sharing and technology sharing between those two agencies. The NSA, the National Security Agency, is supposed to spy on Americans, and the CIA is supposed to operate only outside of the United States. But as my uncle explained it to me, if he was working in the United States, he was NSA. If he was overseas, he was CIA. So I mean that from the age of about 6, that was my explanation of what those two things were. But most people had no reason to know what NSA even stands for. But they're pretty much the same. And so the fact that right before Christmas in 2024, this archive, this official archive. So this is it. This is the government's admission of satanic abuse, drug experimentation on unwitting Americans, the scale of the existence of the annexes, the safe houses, the research facilities, how they tricked universities and churches and schools and private institutions into allowing them to operate on their premises. Who did it? How they did it? What they don't talk about specifically is the scale of the children, involvement of the children. But the archive itself includes handwritten notes between the perpetrators, and you get a sense for it there. For instance, there's one one note from one to the other where he talks about they're going to have to stop using too many American subjects are dying or being or basically it's that they have to stop using American citizens for the extreme abuse because the risk that some of us would survive and then, you know, sue them. And they were more concerned about that than the fact that they were killing children. So their solution wasn't to stop. The solution was to start importing foreign children. And I remember in the early 1960s when suddenly there was an influx of children that didn't speak English that were starting to appear in the programs, and they were the ones who were killed. And the reason they did that is because they had no coverage under the Bill of Rights. So these were unprotected, had no familial connections. They weren't bloodlines. They didn't have families that had any legal coverage of them. So, and that's what they're doing now. So they bring in 300,000. Oh, and the other thing is that these children were from all over the world, but they called them all Mexicans. And that's still going on. Those 300,000 children who were imported illegally, brought over the border, unaccompanied minors over the past couple of years. You've talked about it. Funded by the State Department and moved under State Department contracts and supposedly disappearing, but that's total nonsense. They were all called Mexican, and that's right out of the MK Ultra program. They figured that was such a demeaning term that, you know, they couldn't admit they were Ukrainian children, which undoubtedly they are, Swedish children, you know, Russian children. If they call them all Mexican, we've been brainwashed to think, oh, well, that's okay. No, it's not okay. None of this is okay. None of this. We have to shake it off, get this all poison out of our systems because none of this is okay. Oh,
100%.
and another thing that was when I was in seventh grade, I turned in an essay. I hadn't been in this class for very long. And I turned in an essay talking about why there would be no Black people after 1982. Of course, I got called in. My parents got called in. And it came right out of the program. There was a constant hammering on genocide, genocide, genocide. And they were going to start with Mexicans, Black people, and take it from there. And that was shortly before the Vietnam War started heating up. And so the American attitudes towards Southeast Asian people was affected by that. So it's been a poison that's been infused into us. So why the work that you are doing is so important. And I hope that the people that you've interviewed will look up these documents and start seeing their own lives in here, because I've seen my life in here. There's 1,200 pages of documents and material that was previously redacted and unavailable. You can now read all these notes and start to see how it came together. So I'm like tracking my own life through these files. And in a way, it's reassuring because I'm not nuts. But another way, it's horrifying because I'd rather be nuts and not have this be true. But it is true. And that's what makes your work so important.
Our work, you're doing it too. And
Yes.
you've helped me instrumentally along my way too with the content that you put out in your interviews, you know, and I know I'm not the only one. And Juliette was kind and gracious enough to send the link that she's talking about. So what I'll do, you guys, is I'm gonna have Juliette's information in the show notes anyways, but in that I'll have that the document link down below as well. So you guys can click that and go leaf through all of these documents that Juliette is describing that came out in December of last year. So I definitely encourage you guys to do that. And, you know, if you have access to maybe print out a copy like she did, Sometimes things get scrubbed off the internet once they're up there, and printed copies, and being able to create backup folders, and documenting this history is really important. So I definitely encourage you guys to go leaf through that and learn, because it sounds like there's a mountain of gold in there that we can all learn from. So I'll have that in the show notes. And thank you, Juliette, for sharing that with us. It's always great to have resources, especially when they can help validate experiences, because historically that hasn't happened. And like you said, even now it's like pulling teeth trying just to get them to mention that children were involved. That's kind of like the missing link throughout history. They have never blatantly just denied that it existed. But for one, they said it stopped. For two, they've tried to wipe all the evidence off the internet as best as they can. And, they really just kind of promote it like these were consenting adults that went in and were sort of unbeknownst taken advantage of, were fed too many drugs, and, some of them had bad experiences. And that's kind of like the narrative that we get. It's not really promoted that, hey, there were a lot of kids that were going through this, and that ended up, they kind of like leafed out the adults and were like, oh, this works a lot better on kids. Let's use more kids, and let's use it from families who can just generate a family business generation after generation. And, we get kids every time that, a new generation comes, and we know exactly what families they are and their
Mhm.
bloodlines. And it's become really like a very sophisticated industry, churning out children and, making them a commodity in a sense for these programs. And it's just become more and more sophisticated. And I think too, because it's interfamilial and it's that generational, they don't have to go get random kids now and risk maybe the families finding out and telling. Now it's like all families that are willing to keep secrets generation after generation, of course, until a Juliette comes along and says, no more, I'm breaking this, but it's just become this like well-oiled machine. And I think that's another reason why these testimonies are so important, because even though you're an adult now, and you can speak on behalf of the child that you were, people need to know that it's children that have been the attraction of this, and the weapon that works the best in trying to create an engineered human that they can use for their nefarious dark agendas with these different governmental agencies and institutions, and it's sad that we still don't get that acknowledgement. But I mean, it's so wonderful that now pressure's been putting on so much. People like you and Kathy have been really just, hammering down that wall and getting that information out. And I think, that dam is going to break eventually, and they're going to have to admit to all of this, but hearing testimony
Well,
is
they
definitely
did.
a station. Yeah.
They did. They did admit they've got 40 pages of pure admissions to what they did. And and here's another interesting thing that comes right out of this and shows how it moved right into our current problems with the COVID epidemic and the vaccine, and how that was planned all the way back from the 1950s. And that's that Sidney Gottlieb, can you see his picture? He was the head of the Monarch program and MK Ultra starting in 1953, but he was also the head of technical services for the CIA and the NSA, and he was known as the head poisoner for the CIA. That was his title. So he developed, his specialty was developing poisons to use as bioweapons, and his specialty in that regard was mRNA. So the idea of forcing mRNA on a population was started back in the 50s and 60s, and you can see their little notes to each other about how they were going to get the population to take something that was poison, which is what they don't make any bones about what the mRNA is, and so here we are, and we've got all these vaccine injuries and complications from the mRNA, which wasn't an accident. It's right here in these files, and uh, so it's what do we do? It's put us all into terrible peril, and I think as a survivor of the program, maybe it's just a little clearer to me what they're doing and how they're doing it. but I'm just the head of the bell curve. This general knowledge is coming, and it's not going to be stoppable.
100%. And one of the other admissions that's come prior to these ones that were just released in December, that seem to get overlooked too, are the remote viewing programs that you and other children
Mm.
were put in through Stargate at Stanford and other institutions. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that and why would they want children to remote view? What was the purpose of that?
Well, in my case, and it became very clear to me. I don't know if I think it was after I wrote Sparky and Angels Over Moscow, but I for about 3 years when I was like a 13, 14, 15, around in that early teenagers, I was being subject to remote viewing training. Apparently, they considered I was pretty good at it, and so I was being trained to infiltrate a certain facility in Moscow, and night after night, I think it's in one of my books, but night after night we would go over. I would be put there. I would be sent by remote viewing, that's what they said, into Moscow. And I would have to find my way through these alien streets with the strange street signs and find my way into the facility, which was the communication hub for all communications of the Soviet Union. They all went through one building in Moscow called Rostelecom. And so we went over and over and over. And every time I'd get it wrong, they would punish me. And so this was a long drawn out painful process, but they were preparing me as an agent to go in and sabotage Rostelecom. Well, 30 years later, when I went to Russia after I left the program, couldn't remember it anymore, had no recollection of any of this training. I wound up with an office right next to the Rostelecom building in Moscow, and got into the building and just went up and talked to people there and said, was this in your basement? They said, yeah, for years it was down there, and want to go see it? So I went down and saw the site where this complex had been. It was long gone. Um, it had moved into satellite technology and all kinds of things before, it had just been people on telephones, I think. And so they were saying, well, why do you want to be here? And I was thinking, there's something here for me. There's something I need to remember. But at the time, I couldn't remember it. I've subsequently remembered it, and that's what it was. So 30 years later, I did get there. 30 years too late, as far as they were concerned, but I did get there. So the programming is still functioning, and that's why I don't do any kind of drugs or alcohol or anything that takes me out of my own free will and my own centered, my core that it connects me to God, because that's where I want to be. That's where I need to be, and the rest of it is not me. And I went through a long period when I was beginning in Russia, and I could feel that I was being pushed to do things that I didn't want to do. I wasn't going to hurt anyone. I wasn't going to betray anyone. I wasn't going to do any of these things. And decided that, I'm a doctor. I want to help the children. That's where I'm going to stay. I'm not going to do anything else. And I haven't done anything else. And and that's why the Russians accepted me and what I did and were very helpful. And there was nothing else to it. There was no, certainly I was watched everything I did, but there wasn't anything else. So that's where I'm staying, as long as I'm connected. It feels like I've had this rod going through me my entire life, and that's my free will, my spirit. It's my connection to God. It's my soul, and that's the power we have against as you said, these weaker entities, they are weaker and they have to do things in mass and they have to create all this magic. Magic is the tool. Uh, you should always equate magic with evil. There isn't any good magic because magic implies human force above God force. And it doesn't end well. And it won't end well for us if we don't just find ourselves, be in our souls. Uh, we haven't crashed yet. So there's time for Americans. There's time for us.
Amen to that. And speaking of magic, another thing that, or I should say, another aspect of this program that you were used for, and it's so incredible how many skills they can teach one child, through the dissociative identities and just how skilled all of you are, but obviously not all of these skills are things a child should be doing or even any human, including a training that you went through called Sex Magic, which you actually have
Mm-hmm.
a book titled after. Could you explain that path of your life and what that is and why would they use children in a program called Sex Magic?
Well, sex, they were big on Freud, and in Freudian psychology, sex is the major force through which people manipulate other people. So it was more about, and for children, you've talked about this in your program too, that there is no sexual impulses or sex.
Right.
That's completely made up by adults. The sexual abuse is abuse. It's physical abuse. It's just, in remembering being raped, it's just being hit in the bottom. It's not, has no, you don't have the hormones. I mean, you don't have the organs. You're just a complete innocent. But sex magic implies that in every Disney cartoon, there it is. It's children with the ability to cast magic spells or seduce the woodman or trick the witch or do do magic. And so they give the power of manipulation and magic to a small child and I'm not explaining this very well, but it's our power to create sexual urges and drive in adults and other human beings, and then use them to our will. So I didn't explain that very well, but I'm trying to put it from a child's perspective. As an adult, it's extremely useful, So there's a lot of you see people using it a lot. It's in movies, it's in stories, it's anything that it's your ability to create an emotional sexual response in another person, but you're in control. So it's a power. So when I decided to in order to be a true Christian, I needed to give up all of magic. And I really didn't know how much of what was in me was actually magic. If I tore all that out of me, so broke down those barriers and pulled out all that crap, I thought I'd die. So I did this about 3 years ago. I mean, it wasn't very long ago, and just sort of expected to like weaken and die because I'd given up all my power. It turns out it wasn't my power. It was actually something that had been stuck on me like an overcoat. I don't know. I don't know if I'm ever going to figure this all out.
So much.
But as Kathy says, you really don't have to. It's knowing where you are in your soul and trusting in God, because as you said in your prayer, we're fighting the principalities of darkness, and we really can't fight the prince. We're just like, we are small little players in a very big scheme of things. But we can thank God, we can praise God, we can seek seek His guidance. So every day I pray Psalm 90, or is it 91, where I ask for the Lord to establish the work of my hands. So it's not me establishing the work of my hands; it's the Lord establishing the work of my hands, so that I'm not going off and doing magic or whatever, but I'm doing His will.
And so much of what you described, it's almost like the art of seduction, in a way of training a child to be able to perform, sophisticated seduction acts that, maybe adults would do with each other consentingly, flirting and, just to relate it to people. But, there's been so many testimonies of adult survivors coming forth and saying, yes, I was trained in seduction, basically, because the government wanted intel from people who were pedophiles and who would suspect a child would be trained in how to coax information, how to be able to get blackmail from somebody. It's really sinister, the things that, the weight that they would have, these little small children who should be playing in their backyard and, having a lollipop, like thinking about being princesses and, instead you're sent out into strange environments with strange men to collect intel for, sophisticated intelligence agencies to be able to use for blackmail and other nefarious things, and it's just really incredible considering all the responsibility that you and these other children had to carry just with these, such mature and, like I said, sinister tasks and trainings that you had to go through.
And it wasn't because I felt any of that. It was
Right.
purely a skill,
Yes.
an act. And if I would, they would take a bus full of small children. I must have been 7, not older than that, to, let's see, Disneyland opened. Frontierland was just being finished. So it was like 1956. So I was 6, 7, 8. And they would take a bus full of us. They wouldn't feed us. We wouldn't have any food and we wouldn't have any money. And they'd drop us off at Frontierland. And we had to go, if we wanted food, we had to get some daddy to feed us. And then we had to get a daddy in the wild toad ride because when the train came at the car we were in, there was a light on it, but it was a camera. So we had to get that daddy's hand on our bodies and in the photographs. And if we didn't get good pictures, we weren't back on the bus. So the bus would be half empty going back. And I never knew what happened to those other kids. And so I just got really good at it. And it had nothing to do with my feelings, or it was just something I had to do to eat and live. So,
Right.
and then that developed into like seducing uh, executives at Hollywood parties, and which was surprisingly easy, and getting them on the ground, compromised and high on LSD, and then they got photographed. So that was the beginning in Laurel Canyon, but all those canyons. I mean, it was all around Los Angeles was where I was at that time as a teenager. So
Yeah, you were like really in the mecca of a lot of this back then. California was such a huge hub for these programs, and they had so many different institutions and companies and properties and land where they were subjecting children to the things that you went through. And you hear about that too from, even up to now, the younger survivors speaking out. California still, is a hot spot for that. But it's amazing, like you said, just how infiltrated after World War II our country became and how many institutions, wittingly or unwittingly, allowed this evil on their physical property.
yeah,
You think about a college, people going to get their degrees and celebrating, dumping $100,000 to become a doctor or more. And to think that on that same property that somebody is learning how to save a patient's life, there's you know, doctors and scientists taking lives, and doing it murderously. It's absolutely hideous. And then Disney World, the acclaim that that gets from parents and from kids and how glorified it is. I grew up on Disney movies,
Mhm.
and now I watch them and you see, it doesn't take a genius now as an adult to watch something like Pinocchio.
Pinocchio, right?
Oh
Pleasure
my gosh.
Island.
Yeah. And even, Geppetto, like they even put like pedo in his name, there's just really, you see all these really negative messages, orphan children and parents dying and kids being at the hands of these abusive, weird creatures, in these different environments that they're in. And, but at the same time, it's made to look so positive that these amusement parks and stuff, again, it's like this darkness that is portrayed as light and people go in and they'll wait their whole lives to go to Disney World and save up for it year after year to take their kids there, and have no idea that on the same ride that they're going on for fun that they just paid a lot of money for, there's blackmail taking place. There's children that are being sent there on these little missions to have to do things that would even be extremely difficult and traumatizing for an adult too. And it's just it's wild to think about that happening at a place like an amusement park, like Disney World.
Yeah, and it's the same psychology as drug ads on television, where you're looking at beautiful picnics and sunshine and balloons and happiness, and your mood just goes there. But if you listen to what they're saying this drug is going to make your head fall off, and your ears are going to turn green, and your children are all going to die, and it's just horrible stuff. The truth, but you see what you want to see, and that's the human weakness is and you learn that as a child in MK Ultra, they're going to see what they want to see, and you perpetuate that, and that puts people into your power. So, so at this point, they've succeeded. They've got the country brainwashed. They're selling people toxic food, toxic drugs. They've destroyed the pretty much just in the process of destroying the educational system and removing child protection. And okay, so what do they win? What do they get for this? I'm not sure. What who benefits from creating, destroying the quality of life, destroying the world? I mean, who benefits? So are we back into power of principalities? Is this the principality of darkness that we're fighting? Well, we're always fighting that. So, so we need more conversations that crack the cosmic egg. Someone wrote that when years ago about getting a different look at medicine, a different look at cancer, and I just thought that's just such a brilliant description of getting out of your own mind, the the cages that you build for your own thoughts.
Yes, and people like you are doing that daily for us and helping us elevate our consciousness to seeing the world for what it is instead of keeping that veil on that they've placed so tightly over our eyes for so many generations, and I know we're just kind of getting started on your story, and I am so grateful for everything that we got to talk about today because I think there's already a lot of puzzle pieces that are gonna be very beneficial to the listener on the other side who maybe went through what you did and is just waking up to it, or the person like me who doesn't know that this exists and we're helping create awareness to where this is hiding and how it got there. But before we have a part two and close up, you have done some amazing work with these books that you've written. I want to give you a couple minutes to talk about those because it's something I would encourage everybody to go get. You share a lot of your testimony and so much more information and education in these books that you've really poured your heart and soul into. And so I want to give you a chance to share about that and then where they can find those books.
Yes, if you go to my website, which is www.julietteengel, all one word.com, so really just my name, and yeah, there you go. You'll find my first book, Sparky, is I wrote that. I put myself back in time and wrote it as a child. So I wanted to share what the conditioning was like, what the how I saw it at that age. So I almost drove myself nuts doing that, but I thought it was necessary, and I think it's really important for other people who have been through something similar to see the method to it. The it's a tough read. It's got the my experiences, the trauma experiences in it. But I was also careful because we learned a lot of like the spells and the kinds of things, the magic part of it, and I won't share that. I don't think that should ever be shared. Um, my next book is Angels Over Moscow. Uh, Sparky takes me up to the age of 17 and then a bit into my adulthood. Angels Over Moscow is about the time I spent in Russia, starting in 1990 when I was invited to go there and visit hospitals as a physician. And from that point, I worked on healthcare reform in Russia and then discovered that children were being trafficked from baby houses and birth houses and created an underground railroad all over the former Soviet Union, which rescued thousands of people over the next 20 years. So I spent 20 years working in Moscow, in Russia, right next to the Rostelecom building, and loved it, loved the people. And they've done a great deal to stop human trafficking. And my next book, Moscow Traffic, is I wrote it as a novel because it's absolutely true. If you read it, you'll understand a great deal about what's happening with organized crime in Russia and what's happening here. So it's basically the story of the Russian Godfather. I mean, how organized crime grew in Russia and came to this country, and how it works, how it operates. But it's written as a thriller. So please go on my site, read the books; they're good reads, and I will continue with Emma. We've got a lot more work to do.
We do, yes. And you've done such incredible advocacy work in the realm of human trafficking. I'm so excited to get to that part of your story too. Really shows, there's no little or too little or too big way that somebody can help, and yours illustrates how a small sort of idea in a sense or a small niche of something wrong propelled you on this journey of doing something right about it, and
Absolutely, yeah.
it's so
And that
inspiring.
and that building that you see for Moscow traffic, if you're still seeing that my office was in that building up in the tower.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, isn't that something? Yes, I was up there.
Oh my goodness. And so these can be found on Amazon, but they're really easy to get to through her website. So I'm going to
Yes.
have her website below. And then if you're just listening and you're not watching, there's the books up top. And then once you click on it, there is you can pay on PayPal and order right from the website, or you can order on Amazon and it'll direct you right to that. So you guys can order these right from her website. All three of them are in one place. And I would definitely encourage you guys to utilize her website for that. That way you guys make sure you're getting her book. And, we hate plagiarizing, but unfortunately people do it. So you always want to make sure you're going right to the author and buying it straight from their websites and getting it directly from them to make sure you're not getting any knockoffs and that you're actually supporting the person that you want to support. So I'm going to have that below. And then Juliette, are you on social media at all? Or if somebody wants to get a hold of you or connect with you, is there a way that they can reach you?
I have an email on the website, so they can reach me
Okay,
through the website. And
wonderful.
and the social media, I'm just redoing all of that. So by the time we do the next broadcast, I'll have the social media working, and then I'm going to interview you.
Oh my goodness, I would be honored.
Great. Yes. I think that's an important conversation to have. How you, as someone that didn't experience this, were so drawn to doing something about it. There's a big story there.
I'd be happy to talk to you about that. And I'm really excited to have you back on. We have so much to learn from you still, and we might be doing a fun episode with another guest that you guys know and love. So we'll keep you guys updated on that too. But Juliet will be coming on more often. We have a lot more to share. So, Juliet, I really appreciate you coming on. Is there anything that you wanted to close with today or anything else that you wanted to share before we close up?
No, I think this is a really good start, and I mean in a mega sense that um, the fact that we're talking about this and that the documents came out. And I hope between now and our next broadcast that everyone has a chance to look at the files that were just released, that the CIA admitted to everything that Emma's been talking about all this time. So, and people that have been on the show that have not felt verified or validated or valued. Um, I hope they look at these documents and start seeing their lives and the evil that was, how deliberate it was.
Amen to that. And hopefully that, all of those documents are just still such a, little scratch in the big picture of it. So hopefully this leads to more and more
Mhm.
exposure and things being released. But like I said earlier, I'm going to have the link to these documents below, in addition to Juliette's website, where you guys can purchase her books, connect with her. Her email is on there. I'm going to have my links in the show notes as well, you guys. We really couldn't do this without you guys. If you guys find value in this episode, please share it with a friend, post it on your social media, buy Juliette's books for a friend if you have somebody waking up or a survivor friend. Share her website and her content. We're going to have a lot more to talk about next time, so definitely stay on the lookout for part two with Juliette and hopefully part three, four, all the way to 100. But in the meantime, you guys, thank you so much for listening. God bless you all, and we will see you next time.